Welcome to the Growth Now movement. I'm your host, Justin Shank. I'm an entrepreneur, speaker, and podcaster who years ago decided to go on a journey on how to grow in all areas of my life. What I found out was it's really a matter of focusing on the 4 pillars of life: business, relationships, spirituality, and wellness. And that's what we do here. We explore how to continuously grow in those areas, all while having a ton of fun doing it. I'm really excited you're on this journey with me. Now let's get to this week's episode. This week, I sit down with Brett Newski. Newski's been featured on Rolling Stone, NPR, American Songwriter, SiriusXM, Boston Globe, and Billboard. He continues to tour over 100 dates per year, and he's also the host of the popular podcast Dirt from the Road, where he chats with musicians about their strangest travel stories, mental health boosts, and how to navigate the hurdles of being a person in modern times. So this episode, we talk a little bit about his music career. We talk about the plights of the road, but really we dive into mental health, and this is why I wanted to interview Brett, have him on the show, because it's such an important topic. Because starting with just a couple doodles, Newski posted to social media making light of his struggle with anxiety and depression. They garnered a surprising and overwhelming response, and he decided to make his relatable coping mechanism of drawing into a series. So he came out with a book called It's Hard to Be a Person, offering mental health boosts through humor and relatable quips with the perils of living in our own world with mental illness. I really enjoyed connecting with Brett. You know, we really hit it off. He's a really, really good guy. I think you guys are going to see that come through in this episode. So make sure you check out this episode. Let us know what you think. You can obviously hit us up on social media. But with that being said, also check out his podcast. He's got a great show where he really pulls really cool stories from some of the top musicians in the world. And I think you guys would like that as well. Now, before we get there, I want to remind you guys that Growth Now Summit Live is finally back because live events are back. So I'm really excited to bring an amazing lineup of speakers and movement makers and entertainment and so much more. Tickets are on sale now, still early bird pricing, so you want to grab them now. growthnowsummit.com to get your tickets. Prices are going up soon, so make sure you head over to growthnowsummit.com and grab your tickets today. Now, without further ado, let's get to the episode with Brett Newski. Brett, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Justin. Appreciate you hosting me.
No, dude, you know, it's funny. I don't take, and people know this because I share it often on my podcast, I don't take many cold pitches on my podcast. As a matter of fact, before you, the people that I accepted were Sean T, drama from Robin Big, and a multiple New York Times bestselling author. And so I got your pitch and something grabbed my eye. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was your last name, which is intriguing or whatever. And so I clicked and opened the email and I saw the topic that you're talking about and how unique, your unique approach to it. And I was like, we need to have this conversation, man. So Brett, I'm excited to dive in, but why don't we take a moment and talk about who's Brett today, and then we'll unpack how you got there and we'll talk about all the good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've made a living as a touring musician the last 9 years as basically my only source of income. So just driving around America in like an unmarked white van playing rock shows, which has been mostly pretty good. Obviously the lows are pretty soul crushing and low and lonely when you're 1,000 miles from home every night. But recently I got back into like drawing again, and I just started putting up these doodles of me like making fun of my own anxieties and depression as kind of a joke like 3 or 4 years ago, and people kind of took to them and just like they're like, hey, make more of those. So I just kind of kept going at it, and after about 3 years I had enough to make a book out of called It's Hard to Be a Person, Defeating Anxiety, Surviving the World, and Having More Fun.
Dude, no, I love it. And let's talk a little bit about your music career, man, because I think that's something super unique. There's not many people who can say, I make a full-time living as a musician, and being able to go and tour the world. And I had noticed when I did my research that you've opened up for some really cool bands and have played some bigger arenas. What's that journey been like? Where did your love of music come from, and what made you kind of want to go down that road?
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody in my family is like musical at all as far as playing instruments, but my pops was always a big rock music fan, and he sold radio airtime at a classic rock radio station in Milwaukee. So he nice. Early on when radio was hot, he would get like free concert tickets to like Tom Petty or Skinner or whatever. And he kind of had the hookup for a few years. So he would take me to like these really sweet high production rock and roll shows. And that kind of got my brain churning as to like being interested in the guitar. And like, eventually I got a job at McDonald's making $5 an hour, working the fryolator so I could buy the guitar. And yeah, I just became fascinated with it. I had never imagined in a million years it was even possible to make money playing music. But yeah, being like a 13-year-old kid and just getting access to some of those cool rock shows, I think really like lit the fire under my ass to kind of start figuring it out at least.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And obviously we always draw inspiration from those big names and those big exciting moments. Like you said, the big rock concerts, the theatrical things. A lot of times people see that and they get excited about it and they go, I want to do that, but they don't take the action because it's a little scary. Like it's scary to take that step and be like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, who do I think I am? Like, talk a little bit about that. Cause you talk about getting a job at McDonald's to try and fund the guitar, but what was the dedication? Cause I know how, by the way, I owned a bass guitar. I just told this story recently to my girlfriend's kids. My dad bought me a bass guitar when I was 15. And the reason I wanted to learn the bass is because it looked easier than the guitar because it had 4 strings instead of 6. And that was the only reason. And I took 2 lessons and I wasn't great after 2 lessons and I stopped and I never picked it up again. And so I understand how hard it is. So what was the dedication? Like what was the real drive? Because like you said, never in a million years did I think I can make a living doing it.
Right. Well, as a little kid, I remember like being able to play my first chord and then turning on the distortion button on the amp. And it sounded very much like the tone that Green Day used on When I Come Around on the radio. And I remember sitting around the boombox as a little kid. I mean, you remember these days just waiting for a particular song to come on because there wasn't free streaming and you didn't have everything all at once. So there was this mysticalness to it all. And I think learning that first chord, getting that grungy tone, even if I was playing the chords kind of shittily, it was still like you were rewarded just a little bit, and it kind of dangled the carrot to keep going. And then in my adult life, I started like a bar band in college and called the Toastmaster Generals. And I wasn't even 21, so like we didn't get a lot of gigs because we couldn't like get into the bars or whatever. Yeah. But the few bars we snuck into and lied about our age, I remember like one of our first gigs, we did the show. They gave us like crappy beer all night, which was amazing to drink for free. And then they cut us a check for $200 at the end of the night, which was just an absurd amount of money for us to like for drinking and playing guitar. And that was like a holy shit moment where I was like, whoa, like you can make money playing music.
Yeah, no, dude, I love the small aha moments, in the journey. I think sometimes we have to make sure that we find those and pay super attention to them, right? Instead of it being a fleeting, like, oh yeah, we just, it's this one-off thing. I just played at a bar, whatever. Like that was the catalyst for you to go, wait, hold on, there's more to this right now. I want to talk a little bit because I know some people in the music industry listen to my podcast, and I've had some musicians on in the past, and I'm really intrigued by that moment of going from playing at a bar or playing in your basement to starting to play on tours and do all that stuff. Like, I don't even know this. Are you signed to a record label? Are you doing this all yourself? Like what's the backstory there?
I mean, I've signed small indie label deals over the years, here and there, but I mostly kind of try to fly the DIY flag for the most part. I mean, I got started playing, I lived in Vietnam for 2 years, and I used that as like a time to like write a lot of songs, like live really cheap and affordably, and just kind of like figure out my brain and try to, do some self work and all that stuff. But the second I moved back to the States, I basically just got in my little Toyota and just started driving around America playing like shitty DIY tours to like, punk squats, basements, like abandoned rubber factories. I played like the weirdest places. I would like, I was like making $50 a night, and then like I would sleep on like some concrete floor in some punk kid's basement in Pittsburgh on a bunch of pizza boxes, and there's like legitimate rats running around and like black mold. And I mean, I guess it was kind of romantic at the time. I was like, for some reason, pumped about that, which is great. I mean, I guess you got to like use that energy while you have it, that naive invincibility or whatever it is,
Um, it's so true. Like, I think at a young age we can handle certain things, right? Now we drink a little too much and we have like 2 days to recover before we feel like ourselves again. I think you're kind of close to my age. I'm 36. And like, you get to a certain age and you're just like, well, I don't know how I survived any of that. Like, I remember back in the day, staying up till 3 a.m. and getting up at 7 and going to work like it was normal. That just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, like sleeping in heinous conditions. I remember playing a punk squat in Pittsburgh, and then like people are just partying. There's just like drunk, hairy dudes with long sideburns passed out all over the floor, and I'm like climbing over bodies to find a corner to sleep in that isn't covered in like spilled beer. And I just remember like having to wake up in the middle of the night. I went to the bathroom, and like it was like more pubes than you've ever thought was even possible. Like there was more pubes that could ever even exist in Kansas City. Like someone just walked around the entire bathroom and just had a field day. And so I'm just like dodging pubes to try to get to the bathroom. And for some reason it was like, at the time I was like, didn't really have a problem with it, but now it would be like, what am I doing with my life?
It's so wild. So randomly, why were you living in Vietnam for 2 years?
I guess I would say my world pretty much fell apart in like Madison, Wisconsin, where I was living. Like my band fell apart. My girlfriend and I broke up, and I was like pretty in love with her. And my best friend and I had kind of a falling out, and we were roommates. So it was just this brutal, weird, awkward year, and just like really painful and anxiety ridden. So I was just like, I need to like leave wherever. I need to go somewhere. And I knew I could travel really cheap in Asia. So I bought like a crappy guitar and I just put it on my back and I kind of motorbiked around Vietnam for a while. I played some shows in the Philippines and in Bangkok and played some like ramshackle tours. And then Vietnam was just my favorite place on the map. So I just moved there. I'm like, I'm going to try to live here for a year. And then I ended up getting a bunch of work, just kind of like teaching guitar, hustling, playing weird gigs. And then, we kind of toured around from there. I started a band, made a couple records in Vietnam. And yeah, I mean, it was a weird 2 years, but I loved most of it.
No, that's crazy. And I love hearing, and I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. I love hearing how, you're really about doing it yourself. It's a different era now. Like you mentioned, talking about sitting around, listening to the radio, waiting for your favorite song to come on, not to mention hitting the record and play button at the same time once it comes on, and you hope they don't talk in the middle of it, right? So you can get it on a cassette tape. Yeah. I don't know if you're that, like our 2 years might be the difference of that, by the way.
No, I remember that.
Yeah. Okay, good. So then we journey into the era of Napster and being able to burn CDs, and now forget it. Like you just stream whatever. But you have people like Chance the Rapper, who has never signed a record deal, making millions and millions of dollars because he's been able to take his talent to the next level and hustle and make it work. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about that, right? Like talk about being able to get into these bigger tours and opening up for bands and starting to play bigger arenas. Like what was that shift? Was it starting to get recognized while you were playing these little hole in the walls?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just kind of about the long burn, right? And just staying in the game. And I think like progress can feel so minute and minimal, but like you just hang around and you stick around and like stuff starts to happen for you. And I think in music specifically, there's just this like illusion of like signing the record deal that it just saves you, because like musicians have not only a ton of problems emotionally, like more problems than anyone in the world, maybe you could argue, but also like business wise, it's like in the past, like being a musician is almost had the stereotype of maybe not having a business savvy about it because your main thing is the art. So yeah, I mean, that's just been why record labels have just been able to rip off musicians. It's a tale as old as time, because they know the hacks behind the curtain and they maybe have a few connections, but now it's kind of neat because like you almost get more respect for doing things DIY these days. It's like the business savvy musician is starting to get a little bit more respect. Whereas when I started 10 years ago, it was not cool if you cared about the music business as an artist. It was not cool. It was like, I remember like the hipsters in Madison hated our band because we were like DIY, we promoted a lot and like we played a lot. So we were like present in the city. And there's no like there's no romanticism about that 10 years ago. Whereas now it's like necessity, like in anything you do, it's like the idea of self-promoting has become, if you do it gracefully, it's just become more accepted universally because it's how it is now. It's and sure, it can be gross and whatever, but you just kind of get a barometer for how to do it gracefully and just put out good things into the world without being a douche about it, you know?
Dude, I love that. And so I can fully relate to that in the podcast game of like, how many times can people see my stuff, right? Because I host my own live event and I do all that stuff too. And I'm like, how often can I really post about this live event without pissing somebody off?
Yeah.
And then I also learned the algorithm. Like I remember the first live event I did was in 2019 and I'd been promoting it for like 8 months at this point, 7 months. And I announced one of the speakers is a guy named Fabio Viviani from America's Top Chef. And I posted about it. And this is like 6-7 months into the promotion. And somebody commented on it and said, Justin, I didn't even know you had your own live event and you got Fabio. That's amazing. I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not promoting enough. Like, it's so funny to kind of find that range because you kind of feel like you are being annoying. And on a completely a different note, the record label doesn't mean success. I mean, one of my best friends was signed to Warner Brother Records back in 2009 in a boy band. And that obviously didn't work out, right? So there was no boy bands from that era. And then slowly we got One Direction many years later.
Was he signed to that manager that ripped off NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, that like overlord fat manager guy that stole everyone's money?
No, so he was after all of that. He didn't get screwed over. It was just one of those, you know, Warner Brothers gave up on him. They had a top 40 hit actually the summer of 2009. And then they gave up on him after that because there was nothing happening. Which is kind of wild.
I feel like Lance Bass is still like trying to hunt down that rip-off manager guy in the Bahamas or whatever and like beat the hell out of him for all of his offshore accounts that have his money in it, you know?
Dude, I can't even imagine how much money they lost because of that guy. Like I've seen the documentaries. It's just absolutely crazy.
Brutal.
It's unreal. So anyway, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your book, right? Obviously approaching mental health and depression and all these things. I mean, that's something not many people open up about. And it's something a lot of people struggle with on a regular basis. What made you want to start sharing about it? Obviously you had said in the beginning here, you said my depression. So it's very much a little bit, you know, autobiography, auto cartoony, right? Tell us a little bit about you wanting to open up about it more.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always done it kind of like cryptically in song. That's always been like one of the themes running through my music is like, you know, trying to make some anti-anxiety music or just vent out your brain toxins into audio recordings, you know? So, you know, I think as I started like talking about it with buddies and talking about anxiety, I realized like it was like hard and awkward for a split second. And then it just felt amazing. It was like, you know, lifting that huge weight off your shoulders. So that was big. And then just listening to other podcasts and what a glorious medium it is, because there's no like fuckery in between. It's not like there's 10 TV channel executives like editing your stuff. It's like the people broadcasting straight to other people. And like you know, Joe List, the comedian, was a good inspiration. He's funny, talks a lot about anxiety. So guys like that, it's like, wow, these guys will talk about anything, like brutally embarrassing shit, just because it feels right, or for the sake of other people's entertainment, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's just wildly medicinal, I think, to vent some of those inner brain battles. And I wish I would have done it sooner, to be honest. So, I mean, you know, Justin, it's a good time in the world because it's like, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest where it was like, don't cry, don't be a pussy, you know, be tough, like don't be and now it's like, you know, it's, if you're a dude, you know, cry it up, it's good for you, you know, you gotta let it out at some point. So it's a good time that people are talking about this stuff. And yeah, so it's good to be a person as much as it is hard to be a person.
What a powerful line. It's such a good time to be a person as much as it is hard to be a person, right? Because we do have that balance. I think a lot of times we still have that idea of like, you're a man, you shouldn't cry and all. It's still happening, but I think we are leaning a little bit more towards like, hey, it's actually kind of cool to show some emotions. It's cool to share what you're going through and ultimately able to overcome, right? So yeah. Obviously I know you mentioned and the comedic approach. I mean, I've had a number of comedians on this podcast and they talk about that stuff. They talk about being able to kind of vent and share on stage, but also kind of working through those things that bother them. What has been your journey from that point? Is it just from doodling and sharing? Or are you doing other things to work through the stress?
Yeah, I mean, I think creating is big, whether you consider yourself an artist or a creative person or not, everyone has some sort of amount of creative juice, so I even think it's like, if you draw something on a napkin and give it to your friend who you enjoy, like that's a boost for both sides. You made something that wasn't there before. So, I mean, even like journaling, I find cathartic. I just started doing that, and you just spend like 2 minutes a day, even writing like 5 things you're grateful for or whatever. And that sounds cheesy and hokey and Disney, but it does actually feel good. And I don't know what the end goal of journaling is, but I think it's just free therapy in the moment. So yeah, I mean, it's, just the other day, like my buddy Scotty and I, we we butted heads. He's my best friend, but we kind of like called each other out on some shit. And I mean, we're like crying and sobbing and hugging, and it was awesome. I mean, it was like brutal and hard, but we were like, I mean, it feels good to cry in front of another grown man, Justin, it's,
Well, we'll try not to do that during this conversation, although there is a track record of people crying on this show. So I don't know if we'll get there, but just giving you, you're probably all cried out from the other day. Yeah. But it's true, man. Like I do believe creating is a great way to release a lot of those emotions and potential depression and all these other things. I mean, when I look at this podcast, that's what it's been for me. It's been and at least in the beginning, it was a creative outlet for me to work through some of the shit that I had to work through. And obviously as it's evolved and I've evolved, we've been able to kind of shift gears, but that's what it was. I was like interviewing people that whatever issue I was dealing with. Like if you go early on in the podcast, if you see a bunch of relationship experts, that's because one of my relationships was falling apart. Like that's just how it went, right? It became this creative outlet for me. And so how are you doing that in your music? Like, is it hard for you to sit down and when you're writing a song to be like, here's what I'm going through, let me put it down? Or is that that's what makes it easy?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, if you're a songwriter and you've done it your whole life, that's just kind of what you do. And it's it just, I mean, I do feel like I can make records till I'm blue in the face, and that's not some like puffy chested comment. I'm not like some sort of musical genius or whatever. I just like know how to write efficiently, I think, and I love to write. So I think that's kind of why I wanted to make a book, because I knew creatively it would totally kick my ass, and it was brutal. Like it was like 20 albums of work, like put in basically in one, like for a book, just to like. And then at the end, like organizing your thoughts and ideas. And my editor, Anna, was very clutch and like helping me finish everything. But I mean, that was like something I wanted to make for other people, kind of like to have it as a utilitarian tool to hopefully help people feel better in their brain and conquer some of these anxieties and work through some of the depressions and that kind of stuff. Cause it's all like tips and little mini hacks I've learned over the years that have helped me out. So, yeah, it's just I wanted to make something that was maybe possibly more useful to people than maybe like a niche kind of indie rock album would be. I think it just has a little bit, maybe a little bit more powerful to more people. I don't know. We'll see, but it's going neat so far. I'm almost already out of books, so it's I owe the press another $7,000 tomorrow, which is scary.
So I will say this. I did see, because I followed you on Instagram the other day as well when you got pitched to me, and I saw that you had like 200 copies left or something, and I think you posted that yesterday, and that's something that's amazing, man. It means you're speaking something that's needed, plus you're speaking to an audience that really believes in what you're doing. One thing I want to highlight here is, you talk about anxiety and depression. A lot of times people view individuals like yourself who can get on stage and have a good time and create fun music and do all these things as somebody who doesn't deal with anxiety and depression. Do you notice a lot of that as you travel the world and play your music and start to have conversations with people?
Yeah, I don't believe anyone on the planet doesn't have anxiety and depression, to be honest, unless you're like maybe a sociopath or something. And I could be totally wrong. I mean, I'm partially trying to make you laugh, but in all honesty, it would be strange if you didn't have some sort of anxiety around something. And there's like that anticipation anxiety, even like leading up to like a big podcast guest for you or something where you're excited, but it's like the lead up is wildly uncomfortable. But I think all that discomfort is like ends up being like just a creative force probably when you go live. It's like before a gig, I generally like feel pretty like uncomfortable and not good, but then when we hit the first chord, it generally feels really nice, and all that kind of built up anxiety is just very useful energy, even if it feels maybe almost negative kind of in the lead up. So yeah, I think anxiety is pretty useful. I probably wouldn't do anything if I didn't have a bunch of it. I would just be like a Doritos guy, and maybe some Cheetos mixed in, and a lot of Netflix. So I don't know. It's probably good for me.
Yeah, and I think flipping it on its head and looking at it as like that driver to say, hey, look, this anxiety that I'm feeling right now is actually because I may be excited for what's about to happen. Fun fact, I want to cancel every single podcast interview right before it goes, like right before I get into the Zoom call, because I'm like, this is nerve-wracking. What if it goes terribly wrong? And you don't really ever know. And the fun thing is my shit's not live. So if it sucked, I could just get rid of it, but I still want to cancel it right before every single time. And I mean, I've spoken at events. I spoke at Podfest a couple years ago, and it was the first time that I was sharing like my podcast stuff for like peers, like people that also podcast. And I was like, they might think I'm full of shit. My anxiety was through the roof. I had like multiple layers on. I was sweating through all of them. I'm like, this isn't good. And I had a buddy there, thank God, who's like a mindfulness practitioner. And he like walked me through this breathing exercise. And then, but once I got that first laugh, right? Because I always try and do something in the beginning to make them react, whether it's through excitement or laughter. And once I got that first laugh, it all went away. And I was like, okay, I'm here in the right spot. And I imagine you feel the same thing.
I know the sweats, man. And a good advice from me to you is don't drink so much gravy right before you go on stage. Come on. But,
there was no gravy, but it was not a good look for anybody. That's for sure. Which is wild, man.
Well, what do you do to kind of combat the anticipation anxiety? Because sometimes I feel like it runs my life where I have like events I'm stoked about, but at the same time, I like want to cancel them.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think for me, I tie everything that I do to my greater purpose. And I understand that if I don't go through with that next conversation or that next live event or wherever I'm speaking, that I can't make that impact that I want to make in the world. And so that helps me get through. And there's no special trick. Like the anxiety is still there, but it makes me not cancel it. Right. It makes me go, okay, there's something greater to what I'm doing. Like with you. And I imagine your music speaking to this topic or your book that you just wrote, like that's what it's all about. Like, that's why you keep showing up.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, and it's lucky to find a passion. I hope everyone gets a chance to kind of find a groove. And I think some people are like maybe driven by like a singular mission or a singular passion, but probably more often people are like project-based people, where they get where you work on something in spurts or in months or years at a time. And that's totally cool too. Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah. And look, we can talk. I mean, you playing on huge stages and the podcast world where we can reach a ton of people and all these other things, like your purpose or your passion doesn't need to be this big thing. Like it just needs to be something that speaks to your heart. Right. I mean, not everybody wants to change the world. Not everybody wants to make an impact in some way, shape or form, but they can still do things to get through the anxiety, I imagine.
Yeah. And to be honest, man, sometimes I just like want to retire and just do leisure because like I feel as a workaholic, and like when I get these days where I'm like with a buddy or just like going down, sitting on a lawn chair on a big lawn, I'm like, this is pretty good. Like I feel better than I do when I'm working on something I'm excited about. So I don't know. I've never been great at finding the balance, and I generally find myself out of equilibrium. I don't know if I'm like diet bipolar or something, but it's like the highs are pretty high and the lows are pretty low. But I do feel like the bummer times are generally pretty useful. There's this quote that I'm obsessed with. I don't know if you ever gotten to the band AJJ. They were formerly called Andrew Jackson Jihad. They're like a satirical acoustic punk band. It's like brilliant lyric writing, like really funny and sad all at the same time. But he has this line that says, I will always appreciate bad days like this because it grants me a point of reference in regards to my happiness. And it's such a great line because it's like, oh yeah, the crap days are that's your barometer, and you got to have a barometer for your own, self-awareness and happiness.
No, it's so true, man. And what there, there's lines like that are much less deep of like, without rain, you can't enjoy the sunshine, right? Like I find myself doing that where we just had a run of beautiful days, and I did I just recently, about a year plus ago, I moved in with my girlfriend and her 2 kids in like suburbia, and we bought this house with a lawn, and I'm like, man, we really need some rain.
You're a lawn guy now.
No, it's unreal. I was like standing there with the sprinklers on and my hands on my hips. And I'm like, what am I doing? I need to walk away from this immediately. But I think you need that variance in life to appreciate. Because it got to a point where I was like, how much sunshine can we have? Like, we need some rain. And then if it rains so long, I'm like, where's the sun? I need some of it. And so when we put that into our life, like, I think you always need that to appreciate those high moments, right? Like, you needed the sleeping on the pizza boxes with the rats on the other side of the room, in order to appreciate what you have now. And that's just part of the journey, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There's no better feeling when you're like coming out of a kind of a lull, and that you can start to feel the clouds part metaphorically, and you're like, oh yes, I'm starting to not feel like shit anymore. This is going to be great. It's going to be a good day. And that's kind of one of the best feelings in the world. So in a sense, the lows are, I don't know, I'm not like some kind of like musician who like gets romantic about being depressed. I don't think. I think we all do that a little bit, where it's like, today I'm going to revel in my sadness because it's cool or whatever. But it's just not a good framework, because you do that too long, and then you start to be like the victim person, where you're like, the world's out to get me. They done me wrong. Someone else's fault. Fuck that person. And then you're done. I've never seen anyone get out of like the victimhood toilet bowl. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Enjoy being depressed.
So what would you say to somebody who might be going down that road of like, okay, I'm on the way of becoming the victim. Like, how do you stop yourself from doing that?
Ooh. Well, it's nice to have 1 or 2 friends that will call you on your bullshit. I think that's vital, and you got to keep those people around. And the way to keep those people around is just like having the hard talks with them when you need to have them. It's like, otherwise you see it all the time. Like, I'm sure you've had friendships like go away or vanish because like either side didn't want to have like one hard 5-minute talk to like work through some shit that was bothering one of the parties. So yeah, that's the way to level up your relationships, and you get better at it. Like, it is super scary. Like, I'll even rehearse what I'm going to say. I'll write down bullet points, and then like, I'll have a talk with somebody. They'll be calling me out, or I'll be calling them out. One of us or both of us is crying, but you don't, nothing's better than getting through one of those talks. And it's incredible how close you get, how quickly, after like a 5-minute conversation sometimes.
That's such great advice, man. I had a buddy call me a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, he's got a baby mama who is full of drama. And he's like, I need to approach her and tell her that I've got this girlfriend, and she doesn't like when I have this girlfriend. Like, what do I do? How do I do it? And I was like, dude, just visualize exactly what it is that you're going to say and how you're going to say it, and keep your cool, right? For you to say, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write this down. It's to keep your emotions intact. It's not that you don't know what you want to say. It's to go, how am I going to work through this? Right. And I was like, and visualize her response, which is going to be calm and accepting and understanding. And he calls me after. He's like, dude, he's like, it worked. She was so calm and understanding. Like, that's because you stayed calm and understanding. But I love that advice you just gave about writing those things down and having those hard conversations, because so many people don't.
Yeah, and it's understandable why no one wants to do it. It's horrifying, but you do it a few times, and then you're like, okay, I'm like a veteran at this. I can do this now. Even it's funny you bring that up, because just today I got an email from my ex-partner, and we were like engaged and like so close, and are still very close, and we were together 5 years, like telling me she's like dating someone else now, which was like I almost threw up. It was like, oh my God. And it was like the whole day was shot, but I knew it was coming. And and I was sort of ready for it, I guess, but you can't ever really be ready for something like that. It's just like, it just kind of smacks you upside the soul, and it's,
Yeah.
and, you're better off for it. Every day gets a little better. And I feel like with big lulls or maybe anxious or depressive states, it's like it feels so permanent when you're in those like toilet bowls of despair or whatever you want to call them, that I mean, really, it's just about like getting more time in your rear view mirror. Just like you just need to accumulate more time, even though it feels like time is standing still. You're actually feeling better hour by hour, and then like 3 days go by, and like you're way better than you were on day one. So, yeah, just staying in the game again.
Yeah, and I think shifting your perspective too, right? Like understanding sometimes getting slapped in the face is the wake up call we need. Whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying this is you, but I mean, I've had exes in the past where we kind of stayed connected. And when you get that slap in the face of like, hey, and now I'm dating somebody else, it gave me permission to move forward and move on and finally let that go. Did it happen overnight? Hell no, it didn't happen overnight, but it happened. And if that conversation never happened, I would have held on to hope, or I would have held on to whatever. So sometimes those conversations are good for any of the party, right? Even if you feel like you're the one getting slapped in the face.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a worse feeling in the entire world than like getting heartbroken, But I mean, you got to use that. I mean, you either take that and level up, or you just spiral out and become a Doritos guy, which I've been very close to doing many times. But it's amazing what you just chip away at it. It just everyone goes through it, so it's always possible to break through to the other side.
No, for sure. I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, because I'm intrigued by some of the answers. It's a two-part question. So the first part of the question is, what's your definition of success? And then the second part of that question is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Oh, wow. I think success to me is just like, it's kind of about the tiny victories, and sometimes you overlook those and forget to enjoy them. And I think, in music specifically, 90s success, which is where you and I grew up in the 90s, it's like success in music was like getting signed, and you either got really big or you didn't, and you were done. If you only sold 200,000 albums, you were a failure. Whereas like now, if you sold 200,000 albums like on your own and you're printing your own records, you're like a rich person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've like done it. So, yeah, it's all perspective and just appreciating those small wins. And I think there's always there's always a small victory to kind of like to soak in for a moment, So, and what was the second part of the question again?
What are 3 things you do every day to ensure that success for yourself?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I just started to appreciate how important leisure is as a workaholic, where I used to be just like glued to my phone. And then I realized my phone was evil and it was like controlling me. So now I don't touch the phone for at least the first hour I wake up. I hit a walk when I wake up in the morning. I try to do some sort of exercise once per day, even if it's just like a little power walk around the neighborhood. So yeah, man. Yeah, just kind of, I think that would be my answer to part 2. You're really good at podcasting. You're like an awesome interviewer.
Dude, I appreciate it, man. And obviously coming from a fellow podcaster, let's talk about that really quick. And then we'll get to the wrap up here, but tell people about your podcast, man. You said you've been podcasting for about a year now, which is always exciting. And one of the things I always say is if I'm interviewing another podcaster, go check out their show. It's worth it. But tell them a little bit about your show.
Yeah. So it's called Dirt from the Road. And it's like weird road stories, bizarre, like things that have happened to musicians and bands, like between time on and off stage, because I guess the idea of the show was to talk to musicians not about music, because they've answered the same music interview questions 1,000 times in their life. So it's been cool to kind of crack through to the backstage antics of some of these guys, like Chris Caraba from Dashboard Confessional was on, and he was talking about certain types of meditation that have worked for him, like meditating while jogging, or who else was on there? Stelth from the Lumineers was on there. And yeah, we were just talking about like mental health boosts and stuff he does like to combat some of that anticipation anxiety and stuff. So yeah, man, I mean, it's free form, and it's just an amazing excuse to just be allowed to obtain more information from people that have more information than I do. So it's really, I feel like it's turned my brain around a lot. It's like going to the brain gym, you know?
No, dude, it's true. And I feel the same way after every single one of these conversations, especially when I purposely, I get to know you, but I don't overly get to know the person. Like I try not to listen to other interviews they've done on podcasts. And if I do, it's small clips, because I'm like, let's let this flow. And it becomes, as a self-diagnosed ADD guy, to sit here and actively listen for an hour can become very draining. And so it becomes this activity of like, how can I absorb knowledge and information, things that I can implement into my life in every single conversation. And when I don't know where it's going, it creates like this great opportunity for me to really be on my game. And so I imagine you're very similar with those conversations. And I can't even imagine, I have to listen to more of it because I can't even imagine the stories that some of those guys share. And I have remind me after we're done recording, I have an introduction for you, which might be really cool for your podcast.
Cool, man. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
for sure.
The road is bizarre. I mean, when I lived in Vietnam, I dated this lady who was like obsessed with going to the gun range, and she took me to a shooting, maybe a red flag. And she took me to a shooting range in Cambodia, and she was like pulling like AK-47s off the wall. And she was like, she wanted to get the bazooka, but it was $200. So we didn't have. And like the shopkeeper guy who didn't speak English, he was so impressed with this girl I was dating because she was like such a maniac on the assault rifle. So he comes out of the workshop after we finish shooting the guns, and this guy's just holding a grenade, and his eyes are like wide open, like he's super amped, and he's like, "Hey, you throw a grenade into the pond, $35." And he's like so amped. And he's trying to sell us this grenade for $35 that I think was like leftover from the Vietnam War. And like we looked at each other, we're like, man, that's a pretty good deal for a grenade. Maybe we should buy the grenade. And but I reached in my pocket, fortunately did not have the $35. And I don't know what the point of that story was, but just to maybe not carry too much cash on your person.
Dude, I love it, man. And so I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how do people get the book? How do they get more from you? What's all the good information?
Yeah, I mean, the book is Hard to Be a Person, Defeating Anxiety, Surviving the World, and Having More Fun. The best place is through my website, brettnewski.com, because I believe Bezos takes like 40%. So that's the way to do it. Skip Bezos.com, go straight to brettnewski.com, and we'll put some like extra stickers in there or fridge magnets or something.
Awesome, man. I love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh, wow. I think going through like a catatonically depressing breakup for sure, you know, something that just takes months, if not a year, to kind of get past, and it feels like it's never going to end, and it just pummels you. And I mean, just so much of a stronger, better person for it. And I think we are on both sides. So I guess, yeah, to bring it back around, like no like shitty moment goes to waste. You know, it's all useful in the long term. It's a long burn, Justin. You know the drill. You're a pro, man. This was so fun. One of the most fun pods I've ever done. So it's really sweet of you to have me on here.
No, Brett, I appreciate it, man. And like I said, I'm impressed with everything that you're doing. I look forward to, continuing to follow you on the journey. Next time you play in my area, at least driving distance, I'll definitely come out and check it out, man. But
where do you live?
I live in Reading, Pennsylvania. So an hour west of Philadelphia. All
right, cool, man. Well, we got to swap contacts or something so we can drink a coffee when I get out there.
Yeah, man, let's do it for sure. But I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking more.
All right, Justin, much love.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Growth Now movement. This is how you can really help me out. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. And let's grow this movement to epic heights. And it's all going to be because of you guys. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week.